Welcome to another edition of Responder Resilience. I'm David Dachinger, along with my co-hosts, Dr. Stacy Raymond and Bonnie Rumilly, LCSW and EMTB. On this episode, we're going to be speaking about leadership, the good, the bad, and the toxic, and institutional abandonment right after this. In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job. In this family, up to a quarter of 911 dispatchers have symptoms of PTSD. In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis, while responders are quietly suffering. In this family, many struggle with job-related stress, burnout, trauma, sleep disruption, substance abuse, and marriage problems. In this family, we can help the helpers with vital information and resources, resilient strategies, and success stories of overcoming the obstacles. In this family, no one is alone. Welcome to Responder Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dachinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rumilly, LCSW EMTB. And we're here going to be speaking about a hot topic in emergency services, which is institutional abandonment. So, Bonnie, why don't you kick it off by talking about it? And I know you had a lot of experience, not only as a therapist, but also as a member of a emergency services organization. So what's going on? Why are so many people talking about institutional abandonment?
So this concept of institutional abandonment is something that Stacy and I and all therapists who work with first responders see every day in our offices. And it really is the idea of people are coming in and they're feeling totally abandoned by their institution or by the superiors at their institution. And we see this in many, many forms, but one of the forms we see it in is when there are traumatic calls or bad situations, no one really checking on them, no one providing debriefings, no one asking what they actually need after these situations. And it could be mental health debriefings, it could be after action reviews. One example of that is Stacy and I were involved in a debriefing at a department not that long ago, and the department never provided a debriefing for their staff. And so what happened was we ended up seeing about 4 to 6 of those people really, really struggling and seeking out individual therapy. And what we were able to do was go in later, and we realized that one of the biggest problems was not how bad the call was and the lives that were at stake during the call, but it was the feelings that all the firemen who were on the call had as a result of no one checking in on them. And the next day, everything went back to normal business like it never happened. And so what Stacy and I saw real time was 4 months later, the delayed reaction and what really happened. And so I think that that issue is living and breathing in our offices every day in many different forms.
And so that would take the form of empathy, to be in touch with what's going on with your rank and file, to be able to have a good kind of finger on the pulse of your members and what they're experiencing, especially the day after, right? We prepare for the day we show up for work and go on the call, but then the day after, we have to process or live with, or maybe you have to come back to some of the things that we experienced on prior shifts.
It's, some calls are just especially hard to compartmentalize, right? And so there needs to be some follow through. And so, what Bonnie and I noticed was that these firefighters were talking amongst themselves, and then that's where the anger starts to generate. And then there's sort of this collective, negative feeling about command staff. They don't care about us. Here we are, putting our lives on the line, both, physically and emotionally. But, but they don't really seem to be interested in how that impacts us. And so then that anger just festers.
Right. And what happens too, I think, is that if you're a chief level officer, then you have other voices in the department that become stronger and more convincing, more compelling. And that's a way to also another way to disconnect from being in touch with your rank and file members, because it's real easy to sit around the lunchroom or the locker room, and the guy with the loudest voice, who's the best, complainer, becomes the authority on what just happened. And that's a place where chiefs, could take a leadership role and make sure that they are seen as the leader and the authority, because it's a responsibility.
I think some of it too is that old cultural stigma that is still existing in the first responder world. I think that a lot of the superiors that are still here think that people just need to suck it up and move on. And that was the old mentality, but we're seeing, all of us with our work, see that doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. The old mentality is killing people. So if we want people to be healthy and save their lives and do fulfilling jobs and do the job to the best of their ability, then we need to give them the infrastructure. So I understand why there's an avoidance there, or there's kind of this pull to do things the way we've always done it, but it's clearly not working. And I think just from a superior standpoint, you want your people to be functioning at their best, right? You want them, when that tone drops, you want them on that call being their best. And if you have all of this other stuff going on behind the scenes, which it does get pervasive, it spreads, more people get involved, it becomes a snowball. And so if you can prevent that and just do what's right in the beginning, check in with people, open the door, offer support to them. They can always decline it, but at least they know that the offer was there. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that could be prevented. And that's the sad part that I think a lot of superiors don't realize.
And I want to just throw in there the perspective, perhaps the pressure now on command staff, as you have, social media is so active. Everybody has a camera and they can videotape, things from a scene. There's that, fear of being in the news, being, that the department gets a bad name. It's portrayed in a negative fashion, and, the possibility of lawsuits, being in the newspaper, so I think, but unfortunately, if the, boots on the ground feel as if like that's more important, like to be, that the command staff are being critical of, how was this call handled? Were there any mistakes being made? We need to explain this to the public if there was anything that was suspicious. That comes across as almost more important than how did it affect, the firefighters or EMTs or police officers. So, and I think there's resentment around that. But the command staff seem to be in the spotlight now because of, the access to, everybody's got a camera and a video, it seems. That that the public can capture everything on on their phone. So
I think that adds to the pressure. Like you said, it definitely adds another layer that people didn't have before. But the problem is that you don't have a fire department, an EMS station, a police department. You don't have that without your people. So one thing that I recommend to people is when you go in for your shift, you check out your truck, you check out all your bags, you make sure the gear's working, you make sure the apparatus is in good shape. Why aren't you making sure your people are in good shape? So I've started over time doing a checkout with my crew. How is everybody? How is everybody's week? Because what you bring to your shift is just as important as what we're using on these calls. So I think if we can get people to think about that and to think about the individuals are what makes up that agency, and how can you put patients first or scenes first when your people aren't feeling tended to?
Right. That's where compassion fatigue can come into play too. If your people are not getting cared for by the leadership and not caring for themselves, then like you say, it's hard to care for patients or customers when you're out responding on calls. I'm curious, Stacy, when you both responded to that department in the wake of their, difficult call and
Mhm.
did this, it was a critical incident stress debriefing, I believe.
Yes.
So what was the net result? Like, what did you see afterwards? Were there any changes?
Oh, absolutely. There were some peer support team members in attendance, and I did a follow-up with them, and they said that everyone stayed. Everyone who attended stayed. It's not like they hopped in their vehicle and took off, because some people are uncomfortable with debriefings. It's gotten a bad rap over the years, but I think that they really benefited from, having this issue brought to light. Everybody got to get, speak their piece. And I think that if anything, it helped with the department cohesiveness. And I haven't really heard, the particular members that were vocal and that were very angry about, that command staff didn't respond to them or take it seriously. I think that has kind of settled down. So.
I would agree with you. I think that having the venue to talk about their feelings and to talk about the scene, everyone learns something from listening to their peers or their superiors, right? And so if you're harboring some kind of anger about, well, why did John make that decision in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
That made it so much harder for me. Well, when someone sits and hears John saying, gosh, as a leader, it was really hard for me to make that decision, but I did the best I could in that moment. So when that happens, now we find, okay, I understand why they did it, and now it quells the anger. So at the very least, yes, debriefings have gotten a bad rap, and because I think years ago it used to be, let's all sit in a room and see how we can re-traumatize each other. Now I have your gory details and you have mine. But now we understand that part of it isn't productive. It's really what was the hardest thing for you. And so if Stacy and I went on a call, maybe Stacy has a really hard time because she saw a grandma on the floor with a broken leg and it was an open fracture and she's looking at that. Maybe for me, what's hard is that I had a grandmother that happened to, and I had to care for them. So every situation is different, and what people take from it and how they react to it is different. So I think when you do these debriefings and you have these discussions with peers and superiors, you open the door for people to understand things on different levels. And just surely the communication helps things get better and helps people have a full picture.
Right. And they are heard, where in some cases there may be an incident like, out of normal, sort of the normal incident, something a little bigger, a little more intense, where everybody has their own experience of it, has their own choices and decisions. And at the end of that, if there's no opportunity to be heard on why you did what you did or what you saw and thought could be done better, there's no closure, right? It's kind of like it becomes like a festering kind of frustration to anybody who's out there, trying to do the best job they can.
And it also opens the door to sharing, right? I mean, this is not something that comes easy to first responders to sit around and say, this part of the call really bothered me, or I couldn't sleep last night because I kept seeing it or kept hearing it. And being in a supportive environment where you can be vulnerable, it gives permission to do some of that deeper sharing, which is very healing. And maybe that's all that they need, is just to sit around in a constructive fashion, not complaining, not bashing command staff, but sharing legitimate experiences, feelings, concerns, clarifying misconceptions. That may be all of the healing that they need. They may not need to go to peer support. They may not need individual therapy or medication or anything like that. That's really the message that Bonnie and I want to give, is that it doesn't mean that you're mentally disturbed, or that you need some high caliber treatment. Just like a coherent, well organized discussion might be all it takes.
Good stuff. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back speaking about institutional abandonment right after this. So let's pick up on institutional abandonment. Bonnie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually wanted to share just a little nugget of wisdom that I've learned over time as a leader at my EMS agency. What I really try to do is let people know that I always believe they did their best. So a lot of the frustration or difficult feelings first responders have after calls tends to be beating themselves up about, I failed, I'm helpless, I didn't do a good job, I blew it, any number of those things. So I always, as a leader, go into situations assuming that every single person did their best. And I think that when your people know that, and they know that you fully believe they did their best, it takes a lot of those other underlying issues out of the game. It's harder, I think, when you go in with a superior or a boss and they assume that everybody messed up and you have to figure out how to get yourself out of that. That creates a lot of problems for people. So I've learned I just assume everyone's doing their best and I tell them that up front. And then I feel they're more open to share how they're feeling about things. And if there is a topic, they're more likely to bring it up because they're not defensive or feel like they need to prove themselves to me first.
Right. That's a huge point in that, first of all, as leaders, we need to tell people about what they did right or why they're appreciated, what they bring, what their assets are. Is, if we're going to be able to criticize and, critique their work, we also have to be able to praise them and, tell them what went right. And to do that in a way that's balanced, right? Sometimes people may shut down. I know I would shut down if somebody just started critiquing and criticizing without sort of leading off with something positive.
And I think it creates a team approach as opposed to an us versus them. I think what we're seeing with a lot of departments is an us versus them, and between command staff and boots on the ground. So, and that's never effective. That never goes well. But if there's a team approach, yes, you have your superiors who have been there, done that for many years, and so they do know better. And but they can really make the best use of their leadership position if they also they see both sides. Okay, this is what you did well, but maybe next time you should do this first.
There's another phenomenon that Stacy and I see, especially with police, fire, and EMS, and it's that sometimes when people become superiors or chiefs or leaders, they're no longer on the road. They're no longer doing the calls. And I think that sometimes that leads to not a disrespect, but I think there's a disconnect at times between leadership and the staff who are doing the calls. And there gets to be a resentment from the inferiors saying, well, this person doesn't do this anymore, or they don't understand how things were during COVID because they were at their desk.
Yeah.
We've been hearing so much of that lately. And I think that's harder for people when all of a sudden the leader comes in and wants to say, well, you did X, Y, and Z wrong. Well, when was the last time that leader did a call or made those tough decisions? So there is a disconnect that we see in some departments. It's not all, but it's something that definitely comes up quite a lot in my office. I don't know about you, Stacy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, part of it's also, I've seen chiefs respond on a call, but it's one that sounded like, a bad one. And so they may see things on that call where they're not seeing the things on the routine calls, if you want to call it that. And to go into one call and to judge and to critique the shift or the responders on that incident and not have a better overview of all the responses they're making also creates an imbalanced kind of vision of what's going on. And you could extrapolate that to, coming down to the kitchen and having lunch with the guys on a regular basis. I've seen chiefs do that and have a, very kind of down to earth conversation where they kind of take the barrier down and get a sense of what's going on in the firehouse versus going up to their office and you don't see them again until it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So how important is that to be connected with your members on a more day-to-day basis rather than chief wants to see you in his office?
I think that being involved more on a day-to-day basis, or as much as possible, right? Because we understand the amount of meetings and things that have to happen behind the scenes that people don't know about. But being more involved on that level is going to make you more approachable. And I think the staff will feel cared for. You know, if the chief or if the superiors make it a priority to be there, even during smaller, more mundane times, then it shows they care. You know, so that just breeds and makes it easier for later down the road when something happens. You're already kind of embedded. They're already used to you being involved on a day-to-day basis, and they're going to be more likely to share with you what's going on.
What thoughts do you have about grooming tomorrow's leaders and making it easier for them to be in that middle, because you really are in the middle between the chief level positions and the line position. What can we do better than we're doing already at this point?
Well, we have a slide you can pull up, David. This is something that a colleague and I most recently used with a fire department when we were talking to future leaders, future command staff. So the good news is a lot of what we're talking about, Stacy and I, can be prevented. You know, the people in your agency or department do not have to feel abandoned. There's so much that you can do to prevent it. So I think being a good listener, showing your staff that when they talk, you are listening. I had someone recently come up to me and they wanted to talk about something, and I looked at them and I said, look, now is not a good time because I'm not going to give you 100% of my attention. So why don't I get in touch with you tomorrow when I know I have that pocket of time? You know, and that's being a good listener, being ready to really hear what people are saying. I think the confidentiality, that is so, so important. People have to know that they can go to a leader and talk about issues, whether internal or external, and know that that's not being shared with anyone else. Okay. There are scenarios where maybe it needs to be shared, but confidentiality, without it, you're not going to do well as a leader, and peer support teams don't do well without confidentiality. And in Stacy and my profession, that's the pinnacle. So it's something that it's just so important. And if you don't have that, or if you create a mistrust, then there's really no coming back from that. To have that non-judgmental support, empathy, and compassion. A lot of the leaders walking around are fatigued themselves, are exhausted, are at the end of a 40-year career. So yeah, are they struggling, and do they have to dig deep sometimes? And some of them probably need the work themselves. Yes, I absolutely think so. But when your people come to you, you need to be there for them and be empathetic and try to, instead of jumping all over them and, you know, I'm the leader and this is what you should do, listen. I think it's more important to listen rather than formulate the response. Narcissism does not bode well in this profession. We all know narcissistic leaders, past, present, and future for sure, but narcissism does not do well. Okay, people are not going to want to approach that person. It creates a lot of actual triggers for past traumas. We see a lot of first responders come to these jobs with childhood trauma, and often with a narcissistic parent. So what do they end up doing? They end up going to work for a department who has a narcissistic leader. So they're going to get into a pattern of playing out a lot of their old childhood behaviors and patterns with this leader now. So the problem is a lot of people don't realize that they're narcissistic, but maybe if they have a peer that could perhaps educate them on their behaviors, that could be helpful. Stacy, did you have anything you wanted to say about that one?
Yeah, being careful not to come across as the authoritarian parent, because that never works out well. You know, being a supportive parent, offering structure, offering appropriate suggestions, but as you say, that supportive approach of just listening and if possible putting yourself in the shoes of that person coming to you, the subordinate coming to you. If the narcissistic leaders don't have the capacity for that, that's the difficult piece. But for those leaders that are listening to this, you know, trying to remember what you went through, you know, 30 years ago, and some anxiety that you may have had, or what you didn't know at first, and just, you know, to see your subordinate as struggling with the same things. So
I'm going to skip down a little bit. I'm going to skip those few, but I want to go to having their back. We all talk about having each other's back, right? It is, I think, the most important thing a leader can do. A leader can make a mistake every day, just like the boots on the ground do, okay? But if that leader has your back, that's what really, really matters. We will prevent the betrayal traumas. We will prevent the institutional abandonment. All you have to do, and it's very simple, is let the people know that you have their back and you care about them. And along that next line, advocating for them. What do they need? You know, are there things that could be better in the department if the leader fights for it? Or if the leader advocates, whether it's with a union or with a commission or in the community at large? If that leader is willing to go out on a limb and take chances for their people, they're going to have so much respect. And again, we've said it over and over, but showing people that you care about them as an individual. They're not just a body filling a shift. They're not just a dispatcher putting a headset on. They are a person with feelings and families and a slew of things going on. So how can we let that person know that they are a valued member? And maybe it is stopping by with a cup of coffee once in a while and saying, here, got you guys some coffee. You know, very, very little things go a very long way. And Stacy and I saw that. We did something called the Muffin Motorcade during COVID. Stacy baked up a storm and I cheated. But we took baked goods all over the state of Connecticut to police, fire, EMS, dispatch, ERs, hospitals. And it was something so small, you know, it took us a day to bring some donuts and muffins, but it mattered so much to the people on the other side receiving them. And these things can be done so easily in a department. You know, it's not a lot of work. So what I would say to command staff leadership is put in the work, put in what you want to get out in the end from your people. They'll give you more.
Right. Especially in trying times like COVID, where people are stretched beyond normal, you know, limits of what they're asked to do normally. And just a small token like that will be enormous boost, I think, to the goodwill and to get people to, you know, step up and show up a little more and during those challenging times like COVID.
It sure does. I think the other thing I try to remember, David, just the last point on this, is I remember to show vulnerability myself. Because just because you're the leader doesn't mean you have to have all the answers all the time and act perfect in every scenario. We're never, ever going to do that. And I think people get into leadership and they think they're going to be perfect. You have to get rid of that now. And the minute you show your people that you're vulnerable and that you make mistakes and that you have feelings or that you tear up about something, it's the minute you're real.
Right. And owning those mistakes.
Right.
Well, this is great information. Let's take another quick break and we'll be right back speaking about institutional abandonment right after this.
Our mission at Responder Wellness, Inc. is to subsidize or provide free of charge safety equipment and wellness services to first responders, including police officers, firefighters, EMS personnel, and 911 operators throughout Connecticut. Resources include scholarships to train new EMTs, a responder and veteran-only AA group in Danbury, Connecticut, as well as Police Fest, a fire and EMS boot program, yoga classes, gym memberships, and T-shirts. The founder of Responder Wellness, Inc. co-leads a peer support group sponsored by Fairfield County Trauma Response Team. Responder Wellness, Inc. is a nonprofit 501c3. Find us on the web at responderwellness.org, on Facebook at Responder Wellness, Inc., or email us responderwellness@gmail.com. Responder Wellness, Inc., putting responders first.
And we're back. there's a point I'd love to touch on, which is also enlisting your people's desire to help out and to be part of the department, to contribute to the department. And I would say nothing can be more sort of frustrating and disappointing than to want to do that and even hear from command staff that they're looking for these solutions or these projects to be done, yet it never happens, or it never kind of comes to, to fruition. But I think one of the amazing qualities of a great leader is to know how to enlist your people's ability and desire to contribute like that. I had a captain who was great at that. He would say, sit the whole shift down once a year and have everybody contribute what they would like to do for training that year. And that kind of process where the members are involved directly in suggesting and brainstorming and even delivering the training gets everybody involved. Everybody's, then they're invested in a different way. They don't feel like they're not being heard. They're not being recognized for what they can contribute. And it's such a strength to know how, what your people's talents are and know how to use them, how to bring out the best in them. So, I think that's something that maybe gets passed over or glossed over in leadership development, but we need to remember how to appreciate what our members can bring to the job and how to allow them to do that and, create an environment where they can do that and make the department a better place. So as we wrap up, any other thoughts that either of you have?
Well, on that note, the authoritarian leader, narcissistic leader would never enlist, the opinion of the subordinates, right? It's my way or the highway. It's I have the answers. This is the way we're going to do it because I'm, in the position that I'm in, and that just I think feeds into low morale over time. Mm-hmm. So
you hit it right on the head, David, because when you have people in an agency or a department own their piece of the pie, they're going to be more productive. So if you as a leader find out what motivates your people, find out what incentivizes them, find out what gifts they have. And that speaks to the more you know each individual in your organization, mm-hmm. the more you can tap into what their strengths are. And if you really know your people well, you know what their weaknesses are, and those are the things you're not going to go to them for. But if you have someone who's really, really good at social media stuff, that's the person you ask to do the marketing. So it speaks to how well the leader knows their people is how productive your agency and department are going to be. So it's really up to the leader. How successful do you want to be here? And whether it's commercial with, raising money or I don't know what the measurements, every place has their own. But no matter what it is, finding out what gets every single person in that building to own a piece of the pie and run with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Stacy, any closing thoughts?
Well, I had another question because I realized that the two of you were promoted, into leadership positions within, so Bonnie being a captain at her EMS organization and you, David, becoming a lieutenant. Do you have any closing thoughts about, what it's like to go into a leadership position, things that you struggled with or advice that you have? So Bonnie, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. I think that when you go into it, I felt a pressure of, gosh, I have to know everything, and so I spent a lot of extra time before it even happened, kind of preparing and reading things and trying to prepare myself to know everything. And that's such an unrealistic expectation because I don't. But when I don't, I actually have the humility to go to someone and say, I don't know the answer, but I'll get it for you. So I think going into it, I held that pressure on myself that I had to know everything. And there's just no possible way. But if you can be vulnerable and say, no, I don't know that, but I'm going to find out for you, or I'm going to find out for me, then that's what I try to do.
Humility, I think that's a key word. As a leader, humility, I think, can make or break you as a leader within the first responder community. How about you, David? What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, some of it's also along the lines of stepping up and having responsibility and wanting to get it right, and that there's so much to know. It is overwhelming sometimes to one day be a guy in the line, the next day to be a leader, where you're expected to run an incident and to keep everyone safe, make the right decisions for the department, for the citizens. That would be the point where mentorship and be able to talk to other officers who have been there before. It's huge, and I did take advantage of that more because we can't do it alone. And not only do we need good people working in our crews, but we also need good people above and alongside us who are able to support us in our mission. So I think in terms of mentorship, my experience, there could be a big improvement there. We can send people to a course that's a leadership course, but there's really no substitute for being mentored by somebody who's really understands the position in that particular organization in that particular town and the kind of intricacies that go along with that. And you become a middleman communicator. You're speaking with the command staff above you, and then you're speaking to the people below you, and to be able to keep that channel working both ways, and to really not feel like you're above them, but you are alongside people, that these are people that are working their hearts out for you and to do the best job possible. I think the thing that I always wanted to do was support them in any way I could, with training, with communications, with resources, and sometimes without full support of command staff above you, that's difficult. But at the end of the day, I think everybody that comes to this job, for the most part, loves it and wants to do the best they can. So, I learned how to support that with the resources I had.
That's how I feel too, David. I try to be the best leader I can be, and in doing that, I try to pick up that phone sometimes and call my mentors and say, "What do you think?" I don't ever want to feel like I have all the answers, because I don't. So I think be open and reach out to other leaders, because they have really good advice, especially the ones who've come before you and gone. They can tell you what mistakes they made, and you can learn from them.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and we'll have to probably continue this with a part 2 at some point. So thank you both for being here, sharing your expertise. So until the next time, stay safe and be kind to yourself.
Thank you.
Thanks.